In the sprawling, humid city of Miami lived a young woman named Isabella Wells. To the wealthy patrons she served at Marino's upscale Italian restaurant and the hurried crowd she navigated on Ocean Drive, she was nearly invisible, just another widow trying to survive, her hands moving through the motions of wiping tables, refilling water glasses, smiling when required. The candlelight caught nothing in her eyes. She had learned to be transparent. At 34 years old, Isabella moved through the world as if she were already a ghost. Her husband, Daniel, had been buried 18 months ago. The medical debts from his cancer treatment, $85,000 in total, still multiplied like mold in the walls of their cramped two-bedroom apartment on the edge of Little Havana. The hospital bills came in manila envelopes that she kept in a showbox under her bed, unopened sometimes, because opening them meant facing numbers that had no solution. Her son Noah was 7 years old and asked questions she could not answer. Questions like, "Can I go on the field trip?" and "Why do we eat the same thing every night?" And the one that broke her most, the one he asked at bedtime when he thought she was asleep, "Is Daddy ever coming back?" She would lie in the dark, her calloused hands pressed against her eyes, and count the ways she was failing him. The apartment was small. Kitchen, living room, 2 bedrooms so narrow you could nearly touch both walls if you stretched your arms. The refrigerator hummed constantly, a sound like a sick animal that could not stop breathing. The paint peeled in the bathroom. The landlord, Marcus Webb, had not fixed anything in 4 years. He came by unannounced, his weathered hands always on his hips, his eyes moving across the cramped rooms like a butcher assessing meat. He was 62 years old, with grey stubble on his jaw and a gold tooth that caught the light when he smiled. He never smiled at Isabella unless he wanted something. 12 days. That was how long she had before rent was due. 12 days to find an additional $1,000 that did not exist anywhere in her life. She had counted every penny 3 times already. $17 in her savings account. $43 hidden in a coffee can behind the flour in the kitchen cabinet. $2 in her wallet right now, which she had earned from a single tip at the restaurant yesterday, a businesswoman in a cream-colored suit who had left behind the change from a $20 on a $35 lunch. She stood in her kitchen at 6 in the morning, before Noah woke up, and looked at the bills spread across the counter. Eviction notice. That was not the official language, but that was what it meant. 12 days. After 12 days, the law said she had to leave. After 12 days, she and Noah would be on the street, their belongings in garbage bags, sleeping in her car if the car had not been seized for unpaid insurance 3 months earlier. The only job she had was at Marino's, where she worked 6 days a week as a server in the upscale dining room. The restaurant occupied the ground floor of a building in Wynwood, where developers were renovating old neighborhoods into expensive galleries and wine bars. Marino's itself was famous among Miami's wealthy, a place where businessmen in Italian suits conducted deals over imported wines, where celebrities came to be seen, where the tablecloths were white linen and the silverware was heavy enough to hurt if it fell. Isabella earned minimum wage and tips. On a good night, she made $70 or $80 in tips. On a bad night, $30. The wealthy people who ate at Marino's tipped inconsistently. They tipped well when the wine was excellent or the service was perfect, and they tipped nothing when they were distracted, angry, or simply did not think of servers as people who needed money to live. She had learned not to take it personally. She had learned not to take anything personally. The restaurant had a private dining room in the back, separated from the main floor by a heavy wooden door with frosted glass. In that room, men conducted business that Isabella was trained never to acknowledge. She knocked before entering. She kept her eyes down while refilling water glasses. She never repeated what she heard. This was the unspoken rule, and she followed it the way she followed every rule, perfectly and invisibly. On Tuesday and Thursday nights, the same man sat at the back corner table. His name was Lucian Russo. She knew his name because the manager, Vincent, said it with a particular respect that was different from how he said other names. Lucian Russo was perhaps 45 years old, with dark hair silvered at the temples and a scar running from the corner of his left eye down to his cheekbone like a permanent reminder of violence. He wore custom-tailored suits in charcoal and black, and his shirts were always white with the top button undone, showing the strong line of his chest. A gold watch caught the light on his left wrist, expensive beyond calculation. He came with men who looked like him, not physically, but in the way they moved and Saturday. They moved like soldiers. They looked at people the way generals looked at maps. When Lucian Russo spoke, which was rarely, the other men leaned in as if his words were scripture. Isabella had refilled his water glass perhaps 30 times across 3 months. He had never once looked directly at her. She was a ghost to him, the same way she was a ghost to everyone. This was safe. Being invisible meant nobody expected anything from you. It meant you could watch the world without being watched in return. It meant you could count the money in your pocket, $2, a damp $5 bill, and whatever tips you made that night, and not feel the weight of other people's judgment. But in 12 days, everything would change. The apartment would be gone. The precarious structure she had built to keep Noah safe would collapse like a house made of paper. She did not know this yet, not fully. She only knew that she was running out of time. The next morning, she woke Noah at 6:30 and made him breakfast, cereal with milk, a banana, orange juice from concentrate. He was a small boy with her dark hair and his father's serious eyes. He ate slowly, the way children do when they are thinking about something. When he finished, he looked up at her with the expression that always broke her heart. "Mommy, did you remember?" His voice was small, careful, the voice of a child who had learned not to ask for things. She sat down across from him at their small kitchen table, which wobbled slightly because one of the legs was shorter than the others. "Remember what, baby?" "The field trip permission slip. It's due today." The field trip. They were going to the Everglades, a place Noah wanted to see because he had read about alligators in school. The permission slip was in his backpack, unsigned and unpaid. There was a field trip fee. $35. To Isabella, $35 was the difference between eating and not eating for a week. To Noah, it was access to a single day of childhood normalcy. She reached across the table and took his hand. His skin was warm and smooth and unbroken by any of the hardship that had shaped her own hands into something weathered and tired. "We'll figure it out," she said. She did not know how she would figure it out. She only knew that she had to. This was the math of survival: do whatever you must do, and ask yourself the difficult questions only when you are alone. That night, she put Noah to bed and sat at the kitchen table with a notebook, trying to make the numbers work one more time. $1,000 due in 12 days. She made an average of $60 a night in tips. 12 days times 6 days a week, she had Mondays off, meant she could work 72 hours. 72 hours times an average of $10 per hour meant $720 if the tips were steady and if no one called in sick and if the restaurant was busy every single night. She would still be $280 short. And that was only the rent. That did not include electricity, water, the internet she used to apply for jobs, or food for Noah. There was something else she did not want to face. Marcus Webb had started making his visits different. He came when she was home alone. He stood in her doorway with his weathered hands on his hips, and he looked at her in a way that made her skin feel cold. "You know," he said 2 weeks ago, "some women find creative ways to settle their obligations. Ways that don't require money." She had not responded. She had learned that the safest response was no response. She had closed the door and locked it, and she had sat on the edge of her bed with her heart beating too fast and thought about the other place she could go, the last resource, the thing she had promised herself she would never do. But promises made to yourself are easy to break when your child is asking if he can go to a field trip. Rain began to fall outside the restaurant window. It was a cold November rain, the kind that came off the ocean and smelled like salt and distance. Isabella wiped down table 17, her mind somewhere else, somewhere calculating and desperate. The kitchen behind her hummed with the controlled chaos of dinner service. Footsteps moved across the tile floor like a rhythm she had learned to move with, not against. In the private dining room, Lucian Russo raised his wine glass, and his men raised theirs in return. She did not hear what they toasted to. She did not want to know. She only wanted to finish her shift, take home whatever tips she had earned, and figure out how to keep her son alive. But on this night, in 12 days' time, everything she had built to keep Noah safe would collapse. Before we continue, drop a like if this story hits you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming tomorrow. Now, let us go back further to understand the desperate moments that led to the night everything changed. 3 weeks before the accusation that would destroy her, Isabella Wells stood on Biscayne Boulevard at 7 in the morning with 2 plastic grocery bags cutting into her palms and exhaustion sitting behind her eyes like a stone that would not move. She had just finished a 6-hour shift at Marino's restaurant, her feet aching in shoes held together with hope and electrical tape, her apron damp with spilled coffee and someone else's crumbs. The sun was rising over Miami in shades of copper and gold, beautiful in a way that made her chest hurt because she could not afford to stop and look at it. She had to move. She had to get home. She had to count the money in her pocket and figure out if it was enough for Noah's field trip permission slip, which cost $12 and felt like asking her to climb a mountain barefoot. The grocery bags held the cheapest items from the discount store. Beans. Rice. Bread that was 2 days from expiration and marked down to 79 cents. A rotisserie chicken that had been sitting under the heat lamp since yesterday, the skin shining with oil, the meat barely clinging to the bone. She would strip it tonight, boil the bones for broth, make it last 4 days if she was careful. If she rationed. If she did not eat. The October wind moved through the street like something with teeth, salt-edged and cold. Palm trees bent. Newspapers tumbled across the sidewalk. Isabella shifted the grocery bags from her left hand to her right hand and walked faster, her mind already at home, already at the small apartment on the 3rd floor of a building that smelled like mildew and someone's cooking from 3 units away. That was when she heard it. The sound was not loud at first. Just a child's voice, high and bright and pure. Ball. Ball. My ball. She turned. The red ball bounced across the sidewalk first, a small sphere of color rolling toward the street with the kind of simple momentum that toys have when no one is watching them carefully enough. Then came the child, maybe 6 or 7 years old, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and eyes the color of wet earth. He was chasing the ball with the single-minded focus that children have, the kind of focus that does not include a calculation of traffic or danger or the weight of consequence. Isabella saw the ball roll into the street. She saw the child step after it. She heard the sound before she heard anything else. The smell of hot asphalt and burning rubber came first, that sharp metallic taste that fills your mouth when your body decides to move faster than your mind can calculate. A delivery truck, massive and white, was barreling down Biscayne Boulevard at 37 miles per hour, the driver checking his phone, the child directly in its path. Isabella's grocery bags hit the pavement. She did not remember the movement. Her body simply moved, like a blade through air, and her hands found the child's ribs and pulled him backward with a force that came from somewhere deeper than thought. They fell together onto the sidewalk, her knees hitting concrete, her hands scraping, and the truck roared past them with a wind that threw her hair across her face like an accusation. For a moment, neither of them moved. The child was breathing. She was breathing. The world was still there, unchanged except for the fact that this small person was alive because her hands had moved fast enough. Then the blood came. The child's nose was bleeding, a thin rivulet of red running down toward his mouth, and he was looking at it with the confused expression of a child who has never been hurt before, who does not yet understand that bodies can break, that fragility is not just something that happens to other people. Sure, Isabella whispered, though she was not sure if she was trying to comfort him or herself. You are okay. You are okay. She pulled a napkin from her pocket, the only clean one she had, and she held it to his nose. The blood soaked through immediately. She held it there while her heart moved through her chest like a trapped animal, and she spoke to him the way her own mother had spoken to her when she was small and afraid. What is your name? Luca, the child said, his voice trembling. I lost my ball. Your ball is not important, Isabella said, and she meant it with her entire body. You are important. You are alive. That is what matters. She held him while the nosebleed slowed. She was still kneeling on the concrete, her own knees bleeding, her hands raw, her body shaking with the kind of adrenaline that comes after you have done something impossible without thinking about it first. The napkin in her hand was soaked red. A black Mercedes turned the corner. Two men in black suits emerged from it, moving with the kind of urgency that is usually reserved for violence or disaster. The first man, tall and broad-shouldered with dark eyes that moved across the scene like searchlights, spoke into a phone as he approached. "We have him." A woman pulled him back. "She is still here." The second man, shorter and wider, with a scar running from his left eye to his cheekbone, knelt beside them. He spoke gently, which was somehow more terrifying than if he had spoken with anger. "I am Nino. That is Tony. We are here to take the boy." Isabella did not let go. "He is still bleeding," she said, and her voice did not shake, though her hands were shaking hard enough to make the napkin tremble. "Give him a moment. Just a moment. Let him breathe." The two men exchanged a look that passed between them like a current. In 15 years of work, in 10,000 situations that required judgment and speed and the ability to read people in the space of a single breath, neither of them had ever encountered a person who would argue with them while kneeling on concrete, holding their boss's nephew, with blood on her hands. "What is your name?" Nino asked. "Isabella. Isabella Wells." He pressed a phone to his ear. When he spoke, his voice was different. "Quieter. We have him." A woman pulled him back. "She saved his life." He paused, listening. "Yes, sir. She is still here." Another pause. "Yes, sir. I understand." He ended the call. He looked at Isabella with an expression that she could not read. He reached into his jacket and withdrew 2 $100 bills. He pressed them into her hand. "You saved his life," Nino said. "Take this." Isabella tried to refuse. "I do not need." "Take it," Tony said, and his voice was final. "Please." They took the boy gently, checking his nose, speaking to him with kindness, and then they guided him to the Mercedes. The child looked back once, and he waved at Isabella with the small hand of someone who does not yet understand that some people save your life and then vanish from it forever. Isabella picked up her scattered groceries from the pavement. The beans had rolled away. The bread was torn. The chicken, incredibly, was still in its container. She gathered what she could, and she stood on the corner of Biscayne Boulevard with $12 worth of groceries and $200 in her hand that felt like a dream. She walked to the corner store. She bought Noah's field trip permission slip for $12. She bought lunch for the next week for $87. She bought a small toy car for $4 because the boy she had held was 6 years old and had waved goodbye, and she wanted Noah to have one small thing that was not necessary but was alive with color and movement. She never learned the boy's real name. She never knew that his name was Luca Russo. She never knew that his uncle Lucian Russo had been watching the security footage from 3 different angles, had freeze-framed on her face at the moment her hands touched the boy's ribs, had watched her speak to the child in a voice like a prayer. What Isabella did not know was that in a high-rise penthouse on Biscayne Avenue, 30 floors above the street where she had fallen to her knees, a man with storm-gray eyes was staring at a frozen image on a computer screen. In the image, her face was turned downward, her hair falling across her cheekbone, her hands gentle on a child who was not hers. In the image, she looked like someone who had given away everything she had and had asked for nothing in return. Lucian Russo watched the footage for 47 minutes without moving. His lieutenant Nino stood beside him, and he did not speak because there was nothing to say. In 23 years of working for Lucian Russo, he had learned that the most dangerous silence was the silence that came before a decision. "You know where she works?" Lucian asked finally. "Marino's restaurant," Nino said. "On the corner of 5th and Meridian. She has been there for 3 years." "Good," Lucian said. He did not say anything else. Behind him, down the hallway of his penthouse, there was a door painted white with a brass lock that had not been opened in 23 years. Behind that door was a room that smelled like dust and the memory of lavender. In that room was a crib, a mobile with small wooden birds, a dresser with drawers that had never been opened. In that room was the weight of everything he had lost the day a doctor told him his daughter would not survive the pregnancy. The grief had been so large that he had simply locked the door and refused to open it again. Grief was a weakness. Weakness was unacceptable. But now, watching the footage of a woman holding a stranger's child with such tenderness that it made his chest hurt, Lucian Russo understood something that he had spent 23 years denying. He understood that some things were worth more than safety. Some things were worth more than control. He did not know that in 12 days, she would be accused of stealing from her own restaurant. He did not know that she would run into the November rain with $2 in her pocket and nowhere to go. He did not know that she would end up at his door, broken and terrified, asking for shelter. But he was watching now. And everything was about to change. Marino's restaurant glowed like a jewel box on the corner of 5th and Meridian. Candlelit tables cast amber shadows across white tablecloths, wine glasses catching the light like captured stars. The smell of garlic, olive oil, and rosemary hung heavy in the air, mixing with the soft drift of Italian music that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Outside, November rain had begun to fall, tapping against the windows in an irregular rhythm, like fingers drumming on glass. Isabella Wells moved through the dining room with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned to take up as little space as possible. Her black uniform was pristine despite the chaos of the evening, her dark hair pulled back so tightly it made her temples ache. She was 34 years old but looked 40. The kind of exhaustion that lives in bone rather than skin had carved itself into the corners of her eyes, the set of her mouth. She refilled water glasses without being asked, cleared plates before guests had finished, smiled at people who did not smile back. Her apron pocket was heavy with tips. She had counted them 20 minutes ago while hiding in the kitchen, $47. $47 that needed to stretch into $80 by Sunday so Noah could attend the after-school science program. He wanted to go. He had asked her 3 times, and each time she had told him yes while her stomach twisted into knots. $80. $12 more than she had. The mathematics of desperation had become her constant companion. Lucian Russo sat at his usual table in the back corner, a position with sight lines to every entrance and exit. This was a man who had learned long ago never to sit with his back exposed. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than Isabella's monthly rent, a white shirt open at the collar revealing the strong line of his jaw. His dark eyes were scanning a ledger while his fingers absently rotated a crystal glass of wine. Tony and Nino flanked him like bookends, their suits nearly identical, their posture alert in the way of men trained to notice everything. Isabella had refilled Lucian's water glass without making eye contact. Never make eye contact with men like this. That was rule number 1. She had learned it the hard way. What she did not know was that he had been watching her for 23 days. Not in a way that should have frightened her, but in a way that had changed something fundamental in the architecture of his grief. The front door of the restaurant opened. Evelyn Blackwell emerged from her office like a knife being drawn from its sheath. She was 56 years old, angular and sharp-featured, her platinum hair arranged in a style that cost $300 to maintain. She wore a designer suit in deep navy, the kind that whispered wealth to anyone educated enough to recognize the subtle details. Her eyes were the color of winter, and they were locked on Isabella. The restaurant did not go silent. It should have, but it did not. The diners continued their conversations, continued lifting forks to their mouths, continued the small rituals of an evening out. The only silence was the one that erupted around Evelyn's voice when she spoke. "Everyone stop," she said. Not loudly, but with the kind of authority that made every head turn anyway. Isabella was clearing a table near the window when she heard her name cut through the air like a blade. "You! Come here!" She set down her tray carefully, her hands already trembling. Evelyn was holding something, a curled ribbon of paper that Isabella recognized instantly as a register tape. The kind of tape that recorded every transaction, every penny. $300 is missing from today's shift, Evelyn said, her voice pitched to carry across the entire room. You were on the register during lunch service. You were the only one. Isabella shook her head, the denial rising in her throat like bile. I did not. I would never. Empty your pockets, Evelyn commanded, her tone suggesting this was not a request. The restaurant had gone quiet now. Conversation stalled mid-sentence. Forks were lowered. Every eye was on the exhausted waitress in the black uniform, on the restaurant owner with her designer suit and her winter eyes, on the spectacle of public humiliation. Isabella reached into her apron pocket with shaking fingers. She pulled out the $47 in small bills and coins. Her apartment key. A folded piece of paper so worn at the creases it was nearly falling apart. It was a drawing Noah had made that morning, colored pencil on construction paper. He had drawn 3 stick figures with enormous smiles, the sun above them rendered in yellow crayon, the word family written across the top in careful letters that still reversed his RS. Evelyn snatched the bills from Isabella's hand and counted them with theatrical precision, holding them up to the light as if checking for counterfeits. $47. From a lunch shift. That seems like rather a lot for someone who usually makes 20. Whispers erupted around the dining room. Servers exchanged glances. A couple near the window leaned their heads together, already constructing the narrative they would tell others. I have been watching you, Isabella, Evelyn continued, her voice dropping to something more dangerous than a shout. Desperate people do desperate things. We all know that. Your husband's medical bills, your son, your little apartment on the wrong side of the river. You need money. I understand that. But this restaurant depends on trust. She let the register tape unfurl between her hands like a scroll. And you have violated that trust. You are fired. Effective immediately. Get out before I call the police and file charges. Isabella tried to speak. Her voice came out broken, fractured like glass. Please. I need this job. I have a son. I have? Should have thought of that before you stole from me, Evelyn said, turning away as if Isabella had already ceased to exist. At the back table, Lucian Russo's hand tightened on his wine glass. The crystal made a small creaking sound, the kind that only Tony and Nino heard, the kind that told them something fundamental had just shifted in the architecture of the evening. Neither man moved. Movement in that moment would be a mistake. Isabella ran. She moved through the kitchen, past the line cooks who suddenly became very interested in their stations, past the dishwashers who busied themselves with plates and pots. She pushed through the back door into the November night. The rain hit her like a punishment. It was cold, driven nearly horizontal by wind, and it soaked through her uniform in seconds. She stumbled down the alley, her breath coming in gasps, her shoes splashing through puddles that reflected the neon lights of the city above. The swelling around her eye throbbed with each heartbeat. The bruises on her throat where Marcus Webb's fingers had tightened that afternoon burned as the cold air touched them. She had gone to her apartment after her shift yesterday. Marcus had been waiting in the hallway outside her door, his weathered face creased with that expression she had come to recognize as anticipation. He was 62 years old, the kind of man whose body had been destroyed by years of hard living and hard choices. His hands were large and scarred, the hands of someone who had spent decades taking what he wanted. 12 days, Isabella, he had said, stepping close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath, could see the capillaries burst across his nose from decades of drinking. 12 days until your rent is due. $2,400. Do you have it? She had shaken her head. His hand had moved so fast she did not see it coming. He had grabbed her throat, his fingers finding the soft place beneath her jaw, pressing hard enough to cut off half her air. Then we come to an arrangement. You and me. You understand what I am saying. She had understood. She had scratched his face, drawing blood from his cheek, and run. She had left Noah with Mrs. Chen downstairs and fled into the night. Now she was running again. The streets of Miami in November rain are a particular kind of lonely. The tourists have gone. The heat of summer has broken. What remains is a city emptied of its pretense, showing its bones. Isabella stumbled through these streets with $2 in her pocket and no idea where she was going. The drawing Noah had made fell from her pocket somewhere around 3rd Avenue. She did not notice it fall. She did not feel it leave. She only knew she was running, and the cold was everywhere, and there was nowhere to go. An alley opened before her. Behind a restaurant, its kitchen door slightly ajar, warm light spilling out into the rain like an invitation. She pushed inside without thinking, driven by instinct and cold and the animal need for shelter. The room that opened before her was not the kitchen of a restaurant. It was a private dining space, small and intimate, candlelit like the front of Marino's but infinitely more expensive. The kind of room that did not appear in any public directory. The kind of room reserved for people who did not dine where other people dined. Lucian Russo was there, sitting at a small marble table with Tony and Nino. A bottle of wine that cost more than Isabella's weekly groceries sat before him, half empty. Plates of food, the kind of food that never appeared on the public menu, were scattered across the table. They were discussing something in low voices when the door opened. All three men froze. Isabella stood in the doorway, soaking wet, shaking so violently her teeth were chattering. Her black uniform clung to her skin like a second funeral. Blood from a split lip mixed with rain on her chin. Her left eye was swollen shut, the bruising already deepening to purple. Her hands were raised in a gesture that was half apology, half surrender. "I am sorry," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I did not know, I did not mean to, I just needed." The room tilted. She found herself falling and then, without quite understanding how, she was sitting in a chair, and the sensation of collapsing had stopped. Lucian stood slowly, his movements deliberate and measured. Tony's hand moved toward his jacket. Lucian raised one hand, and Tony's hand stopped as if he had hit an invisible wall. "No," Lucian said quietly. He approached Isabella with the careful steps of someone approaching a wounded animal. His voice, when he spoke, was different from the voice he used in board meetings and backroom dealings. It was a voice like warm water, like something that could hold things gently. "Sit down before you fall down." He guided her to a chair with one hand on her back, keeping his touch light enough that she could have pulled away. He did not push her to the chair. He simply steadied her so that sitting became possible rather than accidental. Nino was already moving. He brought a towel, soft and white and heated by the kitchen warmth. He brought a first aid kit. He set these things on the table without being asked and retreated to the corner of the room. Isabella flinched when Lucian opened the first aid kit. He stopped moving entirely. He did not reach for her. He simply waited. "No one will hurt you here," he said. The words were absolute. They were stated as fact rather than promise, the way one might say the sun rises in the east. Tony and Nino exchanged a look that contained a conversation. In 15 years of working for Lucian Russo, they had never heard this particular quality in his voice. This gentleness was not in his catalogue of emotional registers. Isabella's words came tumbling out, fractured and desperate. "I did not steal. I swear to you on my son's life, I did not steal. Evelyn Blackwell said I stole, but I did not. She accused me in front of everyone, in front of all those people, and I did not do it. I needed to work, I needed the money, I have rent in 12 days and medical bills and Noah needs shoes for winter and his school is doing this program and I told him yes and now." She broke down, not dramatically but completely, the way one breaks when there is simply nothing left to hold the pieces together anymore. Lucian sat across from her. He did not reach for her hand. He did not offer platitudes. He simply sat, his presence steady as stone, and allowed her to fall apart in front of him. "I know you did not steal," he said when her breathing had slowed to something resembling normal. Isabella looked up. Her remaining good eye was red, the white threaded with burst capillaries. "How? How could you possibly know that?" Lucian leaned back in his chair, considering. "I have been watching you for 23 days. Since the afternoon you pulled a child out of traffic on 7th Street. A child who was bleeding from his nose, terrified, lost. The child belonged to my nephew. You held that child until the bleeding stopped. You asked for no reward. You refused money when my men insisted. Isabella shook her head slowly. The boy with the nosebleed. But that was nothing. Anyone would have. But you did, Lucian interrupted. His voice had shifted, become distant, as if he was speaking from somewhere very far away. And you refused the money. I had a daughter once. She never took a breath in this world. That was 23 years ago. The nursery in my home is still sealed. Her name was Aria. I have not said that name aloud in a decade. He paused. His hand moved to the wine glass, rotated it slowly. I have spent 23 years believing that everything can be controlled. Everything can be planned, protected, managed. And that daughter taught me that some things cannot be managed at all. Silence filled the room like water. Tony looked away. Nino studied the ceiling with sudden intense interest. Isabella's eyes filled with tears, the good eye and the swollen one both glistening. I am sorry, she whispered. Lucian refocused on her, his gaze settling like a weight. Tell me what you need. So she did. She told him about David, her husband, the cancer that had eaten him from the inside out. She told him about the medical bills that had arrived like postcards from hell, $40,000, then $50,000, then $85,000. Total. For treatments that bought him 6 additional months, and those months had been spent mostly in pain despite the medication. She told him about the $400 payment she made monthly to a debt collector who called at odd hours with voices full of contempt. She told him she still owed $81,000. $81,000 that she would be paying for the next 20 years if she did not die before then, which seemed possible given the way her body was beginning to ache in new places. She told him about Noah. 7 years old. Smart. Kind. The kind of child who drew pictures of his family and asked his mother if they could afford field trip permission slips. She told him the rent was $2,400 a month and it was due in 12 days. She told him she made approximately $1,800 a month at Marino's, or had, past tense, until 6 minutes ago when Evelyn Blackwell had shattered her livelihood in front of an audience. She told him she had $2 in her pocket. $2. Not 200. Not 2,000. 2. She told him about Marcus Webb and his weathered hands and the way his fingers had tightened around her throat yesterday, the way he had whispered the things he wanted her to do in exchange for not evicting them. She told him about the impossible mathematics of her life, the way every number led only to other, larger numbers, the way there was no equation that resolved into survival. And Lucian listened. He did not interrupt. He did not offer empty reassurances. He simply listened the way some men listen, as if listening was a form of respect. When she finished, she sat silent, hollowed out, waiting for the price tag to appear. Lucian asked one question. The man who hurt you. The landlord. Who is he? Isabella touched the swelling around her eye. Her voice was steady now, hardened by something like steel. Marcus Webb. He said I could stay if there was an arrangement between us. I refused. I scratched his face and I ran. Lucian nodded once, a small gesture with enormous weight. You will not have to make that arrangement. You will not live on the street. Your debt will be cleared by morning. All of them. Every $85,000. Your rent is paid for the next year. $2,400 a month, paid in advance to your landlord as a condition of his employment to remain as your landlord. A different job will be waiting for you, should you want it, managing books and accounts for one of my legitimate businesses. $45,000 a year. Isabella stood abruptly, her chair scraping backward with a terrible sound. No. No, I cannot. What do you want from me? Her voice rose, panic climbing her throat like hands. Men like you do not help women like me without expecting something. Everyone expects something. Always something. Lucian remained motionless. His face was unreadable, a locked door. I expect nothing. You saved what matters most to my family. This is the repayment. Take it or leave it. But the offer comes without conditions. Tony spoke for the first time, his voice rough as gravel. He is telling the truth. Boss does not lie about business. Isabella sat slowly, the fight draining from her like water. Why? Lucian's answer took a long time to arrive. When it came, it was barely audible. Because someone should have protected you before it came to this. Outside, the November rain continued to fall. The warehouse door opened to darkness. Rain hammered against the metal roof like bullets fired from heaven, each drop a small percussion of violence. Marcus Webb knelt on concrete still wet from the storm, his knees screaming, his hands bound behind his back with zip ties that cut into his wrists. He was not a large man, 5'9", 170 pounds, soft around the middle from a decade of collecting rent and collecting fear. His face bore the marks of Isabella's fingernails, for parallel scratches running down his left cheek like a blade's testimony. Blood had dried there, brown and accusing. Lucian Russo stepped from the shadows. He moved with the precision of a man who had dismantled empires one conversation at a time. 6'2", broad-shouldered in a cashmere coat worth more than Marcus earned in a year, his dark eyes reflecting the single overhead light. A scar ran from his right eye to his cheekbone, old, pale, a roadmap of someone who had survived things Marcus could never comprehend. Lucian did not raise his voice. His voice did not need to rise. It was deep and solid like an oath, and it filled the warehouse as if it were coming from the walls themselves. You put your hands on a woman under my protection, Lucian said. Marcus tried to speak. Nothing came out but a wheeze. You entered her home without permission. You threatened her child. Lucian took one step forward. Then another. The sound of his shoes on wet concrete echoed like a countdown. You told her she could remain in the apartment if she agreed to an arrangement. An arrangement? Do you understand what you communicated? I did not, she never said, I was just collecting rent. Marcus's voice cracked like old leather. I am just a landlord. I have a business to run. She was 3 months behind. I have every right. Lucian raised one hand. The gesture was small. Infinite. Tony emerged from the shadows to Lucian's left, placing a folder on a metal table that materialized like an apparition. The folder was thick. Whatever was inside had weight. Marcus's eyes fixed on it the way a drowning man fixes on a life preserver he will never reach. 16 women, Lucian said quietly. Over 12 years. In your buildings. They have all given statements. Some to me directly. Some to federal investigators. He paused. The investigators already have your name. They already have your photograph. They already have the bank records showing which women paid extra rent in cash and which ones suddenly stopped complaining about broken heat, broken plumbing, broken windows. Marcus began to weep. Not the quiet tears of remorse, but the animal sobs of a creature recognizing the cage door closing. His shoulders heaved. His breath came in gasps. Please, he whispered. Please, I will disappear. I will leave Miami. You will never see me again. I swear to God, I swear. You swore to God when you took your business license, Lucian said. You swore to God when you signed the leases. You swore to God every time you climbed those apartment stairs. Lucian turned to Tony. Call them. Tell them he is ready. The warehouse door opened. 2 men entered. They were not Lucian's men. Different suits, European cut, grey and precise. Different bearing, military, efficient, cold. One had a scar across his neck like a smile that had gone wrong. The other had the kind of eyes that had seen things that broke normal people. They were Volkov's men. Everyone in Miami knew the Volkovs. Everyone feared the Volkovs. They controlled ports and protection rackets from Brighton Beach to the Dominican Republic, and they did not negotiate. Marcus tried to stand. His legs would not hold him. He collapsed forward onto his palms, the zip ties cutting deeper as he thrashed. No. No, no, no. Please. Please, I am sorry, I did not mean, whatever you want, I will give you everything. Lucian Russo did not raise his voice. You will give them the names of every woman. Every date. Every amount you extorted. You will help them understand Miami real estate. In Siberia. You will help them understand property values, development potential, zoning regulations. For as long as they find you useful. He turned away from Marcus before the screaming began. He was already gone in his mind. The two men moved with the efficiency of a machine operating according to instruction. They lifted Marcus by his armpits. He thrashed like a caught animal, his voice rising to a pitch that was no longer human, no longer male, just pure terror breaking into its component parts. I will disappear, he screamed. I will vanish. You will never? The warehouse door closed. The screaming continued for perhaps 30 more seconds, muffled by the door and the rain and the distance. Then silence. The kind of silence that comes after something has ended. Tony and Nino exchanged a look that did not require translation. In 23 years of working for Lucian Russo, they had never seen him arrange this kind of justice. The kind that did not end with a body in a warehouse. The kind that extended across time, across continents, a slow and creative punishment for crimes that deserved more than a quick mercy. Tony spoke first, his voice rough as gravel. The Volkovs are not known for their mercy. Lucian fastened the buttons of his coat. Neither am I. But they are patient. They are creative. They understand that some men need to understand, slowly, what it means to take from those who have nothing. He moved toward the exit. Webb will wish I had simply ended this tonight. In 2 years, 3 years, he will dream of dying in that warehouse. That is justice for what he did. The rain was heavier now, falling in sheets that turned the Miami streets into temporary rivers. Lucian's black Mercedes waited at the curb, Nino behind the wheel, the engine running. Lucian sat in the back seat, staring out at the storm, his phone vibrating with messages he was not yet ready to answer. 2 blocks away, inside the warm kitchen of a restaurant called Marino's, Evelyn Blackwell sat at a corner booth with trembling hands. The folder lay open before her, copies of bank records, security footage stills, employment contracts. Her manager David Ortiz, 8 months of theft, $300 deposited weekly to an account she had never noticed because she had been too busy enjoying the power of destroying an innocent woman. The restaurant around her had gone quiet in the way that only happens when people are pretending not to watch something they are absolutely watching. Her phone had begun ringing 16 minutes ago. Other restaurant owners. Friends. Other business owners in the Miami hospitality industry. They were not calling to support her. They were calling to hear if it was true. They were calling because they had already decided not to associate with her. Her face had become public. The photographs she had circulated of Isabella Wells, the ones designed to blacklist her across the city, had been accompanied by Lucian's counter-narrative. By noon, her own customers were asking her directly, "Is it true you destroyed an innocent woman to cover your own negligence?" She had 72 hours to comply with his demands or watch everything dissolve. The restaurant, her house, her standing, her name. 72 hours. The clock was already running. Meanwhile, in a modest apartment in a neighborhood where the walls were thin enough to hear neighbors breathing, Isabella Wells sat on the edge of a bed that was not hers. The apartment had been cleared of every trace of Marcus Webb's presence. Locks changed. Door frame repaired. A new couch delivered, still wrapped in plastic. On the nightstand beside her lay a folder containing her employment contract with one of Lucian's legitimate businesses, a property management company, respectable and legal, and the position was hers if she wanted it. $45,000 a year. Health insurance. A 401k. Things that existed in the world of people who were not drowning. Noah slept in the next room, in a bed that had appeared that afternoon, surrounded by sheets that had never been used before. The field trip permission slip sat on the kitchen counter, already signed by someone, already marked as paid in full. Isabella's phone buzzed. A text from Nino: the girl's apartment has been cleared. New locks. The boys' field trip is paid for. What else? She understood now. She understood what it meant to be under the protection of Lucian Russo. It meant that men like Marcus Webb would vanish into countries she could not pronounce. It meant that women like Evelyn Blackwell would watch everything they built dissolve like salt in water. It meant that for the first time in her entire adult life, she did not have to wonder how she would survive the next week. She did not know what to do with that knowledge. She held the child's drawing in her hands, the one Noah had given her 3 weeks ago, before any of this. A picture of a family standing in front of a house with a sun in the corner. The sun was yellow, the house was blue, and the family was holding hands. Noah had drawn it with crayons that belonged to someone else's family. He had given it to her in the hospital while her ex-boyfriend's medical bills multiplied in the waiting room like a curse that could not be erased. Outside, the rain continued to fall. Somewhere in the city, Lucian Russo stared at that same rain and thought about a sealed nursery door on the 52nd floor of his building. A room he had not opened in 23 years. A room with a crib still made, a mobile still hanging, a little girl who had never drawn pictures of families standing in the sun. The phone buzzed again. Nino, boss? Lucian did not respond. He was thinking about what Isabella Wells had asked him in that moment when she realized someone could help her, and the terror that realization created. She had asked him, why? Because someone should have protected you before it came to this. He had meant it. Every word of it. 3 months had passed since that November night when Isabella Wells walked into Lucian Russo's private dining room soaking wet and broken. Winter had released Miami reluctantly, and now January pressed down with humidity and heat that made the city shimmer like a mirage. Isabella sat at a small desk in a corner office on the 23rd floor of the Russo Import building, her fingers moving across a keyboard with a confidence she did not recognize as her own. The office was modest, but it was hers. No one yelled at her. No one accused her of stealing. No one suggested she find creative ways to settle obligations. Her second paycheck sat in her hands, still in its envelope. $3,750 before taxes. She stared at the number until her eyes blurred. 2 months ago, she had earned that much in 5 months at Marino's, eating other people's leftovers from the trash, counting pennies, wondering if the field trip permission slip would have to wait another year. The office around her was quiet. Professional. Her co-workers, accountants and logistics managers, nodded respectfully when they passed her desk. They did not know her story. They only knew that she worked harder than anyone else, that she never made mistakes, that she stayed late without being asked and arrived early without needing to. They did not know that she was terrified every single day that someone would discover she did not belong here, that someone would point and call her a thief and ruin everything that had been rebuilt. Outside her window, Miami sprawled in the afternoon sun. Somewhere in this city, Marcus Webb was rotting in a federal detention facility awaiting trial on charges that included extortion, assault, and trafficking. Evelyn Blackwell had been arrested 6 weeks ago, her restaurant seized, her assets frozen, her reputation so thoroughly destroyed that not a single news outlet would print her name without the words disgraced and disbarred. It had happened so fast that Isabella sometimes wondered if it had been real at all, or if she had dreamed the entire thing. But the paycheck in her hands was real. The respect in her co-workers' eyes was real. At 5 o'clock, her phone buzzed. Lucian. He had requested that she come to his office. Isabella's stomach tightened. 3 months of stability, and she still feared these summons. She still expected him to revoke everything, to decide that protecting her had been a mistake, to return her to the life she had lived before. She rode the elevator to the penthouse. The doors opened directly into his office, a space that managed to be both powerful and sparse, all clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Lucian stood at his desk, Tony beside him as always. Lucian looked exactly as he always looked, tailored charcoal suit, white shirt open at the throat, a scar running from his left eye to his cheekbone like a blade cut through stone. But something had shifted in him over the past 3 months. something that made him seem less like a blade and more like a man. "Isabella," he said, and his voice was like thunder rolling slowly across water. "Come." She crossed the office. Lucian slid an envelope across the desk with 2 fingers, the same gesture he used for everything, dismissing men, greeting guests, offering payment. Isabella opened it. Inside was a check for $50,000. Her hands began to shake. "Evelyn Blackwell completed her restitution yesterday," Lucian said, watching her face carefully. "The lawsuit concluded. The money is yours." Isabella stared at the number. $50,000. More money than she had earned in her entire working life. Enough to move into a real apartment. Enough for Noah's school uniform and textbooks and field trips. Enough to sleep without the weight of survival crushing her chest. She closed the envelope and set it on the desk. "I cannot accept this," she said. Lucian's expression did not change, but something flickered behind his eyes. "You already earned it. She destroyed your reputation. This is the cost." "I do not want to be someone who takes money for being treated badly," Isabella said quietly. "I want to be someone who earns her way." She sat down, uninvited, a small act of defiance. Lucian studied her for a long moment, and then something in his face softened, just barely, like ice beginning to thaw. "You are," he said. "This is not charity. This is justice." Isabella picked up the envelope again. Her fingers trembled as she held it. "Thank you," she whispered. She did not leave. Instead, she heard herself asking, "Can I ask you something?" Lucian nodded once. "The nursery," Isabella said. "On the 52nd floor. Do you ever open it?" The change in Lucian was immediate. His shoulders stiffened. His jaw clenched. When he spoke, his voice had become stone. "No." Isabella took a breath. "My husband died 18 months ago. For the first year, I kept his closet exactly as he left it. His shoes by the door. His coffee mug on the counter. I thought if I moved anything, I would forget him. Then one day, Noah asked if Daddy would want me to be sad forever. And I realized I was not preserving David. I was preserving my grief." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I am not telling you what to do. But sometimes the things we seal away seal us away too." She stood, slipped the envelope into her bag, and left quietly. Behind her, she heard nothing, no response, no acknowledgement, only the silence of a man sitting alone with a truth he was not ready to accept. That evening, Isabella's apartment was warm in a way it had never been before. The heater worked. The walls no longer wept with moisture in the winter cold. She and Noah stood in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner, the smell of garlic and onion rising in a cloud of steam. "How was school?" she asked, stirring the pot. "Good," Noah said. He was 7 years old now, still small, still prone to nightmares about the days when they had lived in the car. But he was growing. His bruises had faded. He was learning to smile again. "Miss Rivera said I draw good. She wants me to enter the art contest." "Did you tell her yes?" "I told her I would ask you." Isabella turned to him, seeing the boy who had drawn that family picture with borrowed crayons, the picture she still kept on her desk at work. "Then yes, Noah." "Absolutely yes." A knock sounded at the door. Isabella froze. Even after 3 months, her body went rigid at unexpected sounds. But it was evening. It was Lucian standing in the hallway, uncomfortable as a large stone wearing a tailored suit, holding a small gift bag. "For Noah," Lucian said without preamble. His teacher mentioned he liked drawing. "These are professional art supplies." Isabella took the bag, surprised beyond words. Professional supplies cost money. Real money. Money that mattered. "Would you like to come in for coffee?" she asked. Lucian hesitated. Then, yes. They sat at her small kitchen table, the one that had wobbled before she used shims under the legs. Lucian looked enormous in that space, his shoulders nearly touching the walls. Noah showed him drawing after drawing, scenes of beaches, of houses, of the sun in every corner. Lucian examined each one with the seriousness of a man reviewing legal documents. "These are good," he said, and Isabella could hear that he meant it. "This one, with the waves. You understand perspective. That takes skill." Noah beamed. "Are you my mom's boss?" "I suppose I am. She talks about you. She says you helped us when nobody else would." Noah continued, oblivious to the weight in the room. "She says you are a good man." Lucian glanced at Isabella, who blushed deeply. His expression shifted, something vulnerable crossed his face, like a door opening briefly into a room he kept locked. "I am not sure that is true," Lucian said. Noah shrugged with the complete certainty of childhood. "My mom does not lie." When Lucian left, Isabella walked him to the door. He paused on the threshold. "Thank you," he said. "For what you said. About the nursery. You do not have to thank me." "Yes," Lucian said, and his voice carried the weight of a man making a decision. "I do." 6 months later, July burned Miami into submission. The city sweated and shimmered, and Isabella Wells walked through the lobby of the Russo import building with the ease of someone who belonged there. She had been promoted twice. She managed 3 offices now. The medical debts were paid. Noah thrived in his new school. There was money in the bank, real money, earned through her own work. Respect, not pity. She climbed to the rooftop without knocking. Lucian stood at the edge, looking over Miami. The city sprawled beneath him like something he owned. Perhaps he did. She joined him in silence. "I opened the nursery last week," Lucian said without turning to her. Isabella waited. "It had been sealed for 23 years, he continued. "I thought if I opened it, I would fall apart. But I did not. I sat in the rocking chair for an hour. I cried. And then I left, and the door stayed open." Isabella took his hand, the first time she had initiated touch. Lucian looked at their joined hands as if they were a language he had forgotten but was learning to read again. "I am proud of you," Isabella said. "I have done terrible things to terrible people. You know that. I know you protected me when no one else would. I know you gave me a chance to rebuild without asking for anything in return. I know you sat at my kitchen table and told my son his drawings were good, and you meant it." She paused. "I know that every day we choose between fear and trust, between closing ourselves off and opening our hearts. You chose trust." Lucian turned to face her fully. His scar caught the sunlight. His eyes, dark as a storm, held something new. Something vulnerable. "Isabella, I have been protecting you from a distance because I did not think I had the right to ask for more. But I am asking now. Not as your employer. As a man who has not felt alive in 23 years until you walked through that door soaking wet and broken and still defiant." Isabella smiled. "That is the worst romantic speech I have ever heard." Lucian's mouth almost curved upward. "I am out of practice. Try again." "I want to know you," Lucian said. "Not protect you. Not employ you. Know you. If you will let me. I already decided that 3 months ago. I was waiting for you to catch up." They kissed, slow, careful, full of time and second chances. Below them, Miami glittered. The nursery door stood open on the 52nd floor, sunlight streaming in, fresh flowers on the windowsill. The sealed room that had held grief now held light. Every day we choose between fear and trust, between closing ourselves off and opening our hearts. Isabella taught Lucian that protecting someone is not the same as knowing them. And sometimes the people we save end up saving us in return. If this story moved you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to believe that broken things can be made whole again. Subscribe because tomorrow we have another story about the unexpected ways people save each other. Drop a comment. Have you ever helped someone without knowing how much it would change both your lives? Your story matters. We will see you in the next one.